If you separate a culture down to its most basic arts, you find that there are five arts that are at the root of every other kind of art. It's dance, music, visual art, adornment, and storytelling. And if we compare these arts in the four corners of Africa, we will prove today that these arts are shared within these nations. Now, before I showed you how the ancient Egyptians were similar to other African dancers, even down to the Bantus, but what I didn't do was show you how similar these arts are to each other, even the modern people living today. And that's what we shall do first. Then we should look at functional arts. So, first, let me explain something about dancing, because that's the first topic we're going to do. Dancing today seems like something that you just do for fun. But remember, in the past, everything was tied with religion. So, when people were dancing in the past, there was a religious undertone. That's why you see in ancient Egypt and in other parts of Africa the arms raised in a prayer stance, which is typically African, and then also stomping. As you can see with this picture that a lot of people like to show, you can almost guess what this woman is going to do next just by looking at her. Her leg is raised. You can tell that she's going to drop it and then raise the other. Her arms move in such a way that there's no way she's moving backwards. She's moving forward, and the person behind her is moving the opposite way. And so maybe they're moving back and forth in this stompy pattern with their arms raised and maybe dropping them and raising them and dropping them. We see here with these other women from a tomb that they are clearly stomping. One of their legs is up in the air, but only slightly. It's not completely in the air as to show walking or something. And as you can see, they're leaning back a little bit as if to be like, okay, there we go, and bang, and up and bang, and their hands in the air. And like I said, this is typical in Africa of praise. And that's because you can't separate religion from music in Africa up until the modern times when music just becomes something that you can do for fun. These dances are obviously from the same origin, but they have their own traditional bend and they flow in a way which you can still see their origin left tight. For example, in African dance, you notice how there's no crowd. The crowd is not an audience, it's actually part of the dance, and they do the clapping, the music. You hear that sound that they make with their mouth that's like a bird noise. It's called ululating, and it's done all over in Africa. But you notice that all over Africa they've got the similar sound. Even when I switch sounds, you can hear that it's the basic clap. In Africa, the main sound that guides you is that big clap, that boom, 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 like that, in that pace, boom, 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 and you can hear the clap. Given the multiple stomping and the lifting of the leg, it is not then impossible to imagine why the ancient Egyptians have pictures like these that visualize legs going up or these which have prayer hands going up, because these prayer hands, and this is a funeral that these women are attending. That's why their hands are up in the air like this. The reason is praising, putting your hands up like that, like they do in the dances. The similarities are a little more than uncanny, but you will notice that as soon as the dancers switch, does the people watching. And a lot of the times, the people watching are not being startled, even though most African dances look like they're startling. The crowd is not startled. They're actually part of it. They're basically mixed in with the chaos. And you will see that there's a video where the white person who doesn't understand African dance, when the person says he's blaming the audience when he messes up, he doesn't realize that the audience is part of the dance. That the crowd, there isn't a crowd that just watches you.
Now he's blaming the clappers for his guy's mistake. So you see, they're the only ones clapping.
In these traditional styles, the music is the guide. And so if you mess up the music, you mess up the dance because they follow you. And notice that in almost all the cultures of Africa, the people who are watching or the audience are a bunch of clappers who sing and dance. And unlike other places, it's not you have a musician, you have a stage, or you have a bunch of people who just sit down and watch you and it's all up to you. Instead, it's a group activity, it's a community activity. But what about this? To the untrained eye, this woman is merely posing in this position, but in real life, she is not posing, she's dancing. And this is beautifully depicted in other pictures that show other parts of this dance, which you will see is a sort of break dance that people used to do in Africa. They do this in West Africa, they do it in Southern Africa, they do it in Uganda, they do it in a lot of places. It's a sort of crawl on your head type of dance. But even more intriguing are these tube like hairstyles, which almost look like other African hairstyles. I could pick 100 African dances that could match this one, and it's easy to say that, okay, it matches, but also notice how ancient Egyptians are not that modest. Just like the other Africans, they lack modesty. Their women are basically half naked. They're not wearing bras, and they're doing dances which have a maybe sexual undertone under it. And finally, though this is not the lost dance that is similar, I just don't want to overload you with 1,000 dances. But there's something called the ring dance or the woman's circle, where a woman jumps in and she starts dancing. And as you can see, typical of every other dance that I've shown you, whether it's Somali or it's the Himba, who are in Southwest Africa, very Southwest Africa, then you can tell that they have this similarity in the way they do it, where they're still stomping, they still have a crowd clapping, the crowd is performing most of the music, and then they do this twirl thing. And this twirl is the same. It represents the same thing as those kicks and everything else.